What happens aback one of the bigger superstars in ball sits bottomward for what should be a accepted morning actualization account abandoned to face a host who seems bent to breach her down. What we witnessed on CBS Sunday Morning was annihilation, abbreviative atomic, as Jennifer Lopez activate herself in the action of her activity adjoined Tony Dokoupil, an announcer who allegedly forgot the basal rules of account and professionalism. This wasn't aloof, an account gone wrong. This was a adept chic in how not to amusement your guests. And by the end of it, Aegis had to footfall in AI4. We dive into this absurd story, accomplish abiding, you hit that subscribe button and let me perceive in the comments what you anticipate about hosts who ambuscade their guests. The morning started like any added at the CBS studios in New York. Jennifer Lopez, accustomed at 6:30 in the morning, altogether dressed in an affected crimson black blazer, her beard styled flawlessly admitting the aboriginal hour. She had been appointed on CBS Sunday Morning to advance her latest project. And like the consummate able she is, she came able with talking points, anecdotes, and that signature Lopez agreeableness that has captivated audiences for decades. Tony Dokoupil, however, seemed to acquire added affairs entirely. From the moment the cameras started rolling, article acquainted off-area best hosts would activate with balmy pleasantries or conceivably an animadversion about her beauteous appearance. Tony launched beeline into what could abandoned be declared as an interrogation. Jennifer, let's allocution about your projects. Tony began, but his emphasis was already sharp, cutting. Some critics are saying, you're accomplished, you're prime. How do you acknowledge to that? The catechism hit the flat like a slap. Alike, the aggregation associates exchanged glances, their expressions assuming bright discomfort. This wasn't how you accessible an account with a guest abnormally, not addition of Jennifer's caliber. Jennifer, to her credit, maintained her composure. She abashed heartily in her chair, a confident smile still gracing her lips, admitting anyone watching anxiously could see the beam of abruptness in her eyes. Well, Tony, I anticipate that's an absorbing way to alpha our conversation, she replied, her articulation steady, but with an adumbration of animate underneath. I've been adored to acquire a career that spans over 3 decades, and I'm still actuality because I abide to advance in claiming myself. I anticipate my assignment speaks for itself. But Tony wasn't done. In fact, he seemed emboldened by her adept response. But let's be honest here, Jennifer, your aftermost few movies haven't performed able-bodied at the box office. Your music isn't topping the archive like it acclimated to. Are you accepting agitation, accepting that your best caniculability be abaft you? The temperature in the flat seemed to be tipped. This wasn't journalism. This was appearance assassination, bearded as an interview. The camera operators looked afflictive abaft their equipment, and you could about feel the restriction beaming from every bend of the room. Jennifer's smile assuredly began to falter. She took abysmal animation, and aback she battened again. Her articulation agitated, admonishing that Tony should acquire heated. I'm sorry, but I anticipate there's been some abashing about what affectionate of account this was declared to be, she said, her Puerto Rican emphasis, acceptable, hardly added arresting, as her affections began to surface. I came actuality, too, allocution about my accepted projects and ethics with your audience. I didn't appear at actuality to be disrespected. Tony leaned aback in his armchair with what could abandon be declared as a smirk. I'm aloof, allurement, the questions that Bodhi's appetite answers to. Jennifer, isn't that what acceptable journalism is about? Acceptable journalism, Jennifer advanced back, her articulation assents slightly, involves preparation, respect, and actually active to your guests' answers instead of aloof, cat and mouse for your abutting befalling to attack. The chat advanced abashed in the air, like smoke from a gun. This was no best, a celebrity interview. This had become a paction of wills. And Tony Dokoupil seemed to be adequate, every additional of it. Attack, Tony repeated, finding innocence. I anticipate your actuality, a bit dramatic, don't you? I'm artlessly accomplishing my job. Your job, Jennifer said, her articulation, now accustomed the abounding weight of her years in the industry, is declared to be creating an agreeable chat that serves your viewers. What you're accomplishing is aggravating to actualize altercation for clicks and views, and you're accomplishing it at my expense. The aggregation was now above board, staring. In all their years of live television, they had rarely credible a bedfellow angle up to a host so directly. And they had actually never credible a host be so above board, Alice to addition of Jennifer's stature. Tony, however, seemed to adapt. Her attrition is weakness rather than strength. He apprenticed advanced with a like, added aggression. Well aback, we're talking about controversy. Let's altercate your claimed life. Your relationships acquire, been appealing public, haven't they? Some abilities say you acquire a arrangement of bootless relationships. What do you anticipate that says about you as a person? The catechism beyond every band of appropriateness and professionalism. Jennifer's eyes flashed with 18-carat acrimony now, and she leaned advanced in her chair. Excuse me, she said, her articulation alarmingly quiet. What did you aloof say? To me, Tony, allegedly mistaking her controlled acerbity for surrender, angled down. I'm talking about your clue almanac with relationships, assorted marriages, accessible breakups. Don't you anticipate your admirers deserve to apperceive if there's article about your appearance that makes it difficult for you to advance abiding commitments? The flat fell into complete silence, except for the hum of the cameras. Alike, the complete technicians assumed to be captivation their breath. Jennifer Lopez, one of the best acknowledged entertainers in the world, sat arctic for a moment, processing the arduous adventurousness of what she had aloof heard. Aback, she assuredly spoke. Her articulation agitated decades of acquaintance ambidextrous with media scrutiny, accessible judgment, and the affectionate of sexist bifold standards that changeable celebrities face every day. Tony, I appetite you to acquire to me complete carefully, she began, her emphasis now actually bare of any pretense of media accomplished politeness. I acquire been in this business for over 30 years. I acquire dealt with every affectionate, of journalist, interviewer, and media personality you can imagine. I acquire answered boxy questions. I acquire discussed, claimed capacity, aback appropriate, and I acquire consistently maintained my professionalism alike, aback, others acquire not. She paused. Absolution, her words bore in A4 continuing. But what you aloof did, what you aloof asked me, that wasn't journalism. That was a claimed advance advised to abase me on civic television. And I appetite to apperceive adapted now. Afore we go, and he added what your ambition is here. Because if your ambition is to acquire a admiring chat about my career and my projects, afresh we can continue. But if your ambition is to breach me bottomward for your own entertainment, afresh we acquire a problem. Tony's acknowledgement would prove to be the bout that let the agglutinate on what was about to become television history. Tony's acknowledgement would prove to be the bout that lit the agglutinate on what was about to become television history. Instead of acknowledging the accurate credibility Jennifer had aloof made, instead of acquainted that he had beyond a line, Tony Dokoupil did article that abashed anybody in that studio. He laughed. Not a bashed laugh, not an atoning chuckle, but a condescending, dismissive beam that seemed to say he activate her apropos, agreeable rather than legitimate. Jennifer, he said, abashed his arch like a aghast abecetery. Acclamation, a difficult student. I anticipate your demography this way too personally. This is television. This is what we do here. We ask the adamantine questions that added bodies are abashed to ask. The adventurousness of his acknowledgement beatific a arresting shock through Jennifer's system. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she seemed actually abashed that addition animal actuality could be so actually tone-deaf to what had aloof happened. Are you actively sitting there, cogent me that I'm demography claimed attacks too personally? She asked, her articulation incredulous. Tony, do you apprehend yourself adapted now? Do you acquire what you aloof said to me? But Tony was on a cycle now, allegedly assertive that he was in ascendancy of the situation. He leaned forward, adopting what he allegedly anticipation was a austere journalistic pose. What I said was a accepted catechism about patterns of behavior that are allotment of your accessible record. If you can't handle questions about your accessible life, afresh, maybe you shouldn't be accomplishing interviews. The words hit the flat like a bomb. Several aggregation associates actually gasped audibly. The camera abutting to Jennifer, after said that he could see her easily abashed slightly, not from fear, but from authentic rage. Jennifer stood up. The movement was so abrupt and complete that it bent anybody off guard. She didn't bang her armchair aback or accomplish any affecting gestures. She artlessly rose to her anxiety with the affectionate of abode and attendance that reminded anybody in that allowance actually who they were ambidextrous with. I charge you to stop the cameras adapted now, she said, her articulation accustomed, an ascendancy that fabricated it bright. This wasn't a request. Tony, however, seemed to adapt her continuing, as some affectionate, of tantrum, appear on. Jennifer, sit aback, down. Your actuality ridiculous. Ridiculous, Jennifer repeated, and now her articulation agitated the abounding ability of addition, who had spent decades advantageous stages, cine sets, and boardrooms. I'm actuality, antic for assured basal animal appropriateness from a able interviewer. She angry to abode the aggregation directly. Blank, Tony, completely. I appetite the cameras. Off. This account is over. Now, delay aloof a minute. Tony interjected, assuredly appearing to apprehend that he ability be accident ascendancy of the situation. You can't aloof, airing out of an account because you don't like the questions. Jennifer, angry aback to face him, and the attending in her eyes could acquire Arctic water. Watch me, she said simply. But Tony, in what would prove to be his final and best adverse mistake, absentatively to try to advance his ascendancy as the host. Jennifer, you active a arrangement to be here. You acquire able obligations. You can't aloof storm off because addition asked you a boxy question. A boxy question. Jennifer's articulation rose for the Aboriginal time, and the raw affect in it was unmistakable. Tony, you attacked my character. You angered my claimed relationships, and you did it all with a smile on your face like you were adequate every additional of it. That's not boxy journalism. That's cruelty. She began effective against her purse, which was sitting on an adjacent chair, acutely advancing to leave. Tony, allegedly panicking at the anticipation of accident, his interview, fabricated one, aftermost, atrocious advance to achieve control. Fine, if that's how you appetite to comedy this, he said, his articulation demography on an awful bend that anybody in the allowance could hear. Maybe this is actually the affectionate of behavior that explains why your relationships don't assignment out. Maybe this is why Bodies are starting to say you're difficult to assignment with. The flat went to sleep silent. Jennifer chockfull. Moving, she angry about boring, and aback she looked at Tony this time. There was article altered in her expression. The acrimony was still there, but now it was abutting by article else. Article that fabricated alike, the acclimatized television aggregation booty, a footfall back. What did you aloof say to me? She asked, her articulation so quiet, it was about, aloft, a whisper. Tony, allegedly, acumen, he had gone too far, but clumsy to a back bottomward now, stumbled advance with his attack. I'm aloof adage that maybe, if you could handle a little criticism. A little boxy questioning. A fresh maybe you wouldn't acquire such a adamantine, time, advancement, able relationships. Able relationships. Jennifer afresh, boring, as if she was testing anniversary word. Tony, are you suggesting that my acknowledgement to your amateurish behavior is somehow apocalyptic of problems in my claimed life? I'm suggesting, Tony said, his articulation accepting added arresting by the additional that maybe you charge to apprentice how to booty acknowledgement after accepting so affecting about it. The chat affecting was the final straw. Jennifer Lopez had spent her complete career actuality told she was too affecting whenever she stood up for herself. She had heard it from Admiral Who Capital to pay her beneath than her macho custers. From music Admiral Who Capital to ascendancy, her image. From journalists Who Capital to abate her, to account instead of discussing her complete achievements. And now actuality was Tony Dokoupil application that aforementioned annoyed sexist playbook. Emotional, she repeated. And now her articulation agitated 30 years of annoyance with men who had approved to abate her. By absolution, her accepted as hysteria. Tony, I appetite you to anticipate complete anxiously about your abutting words because what you say adapted. Now is activity to actuate whether this bearings gets worse, or whether we can acquisition some way to deliver what's larboard of your professionalism. But Tony, allegedly butterfingers of account, the allowance or acquainted the force of the moment, chose to dig his aperture alike deeper. Look, Jennifer, I get that you're acclimated to bodies, alleviate of you, like a princess. But this is complete journalism. If you can't handle it, afresh, maybe you should stick to ball shows area. They'll aloof ask you about your admired blush and what you had for breakfast. The airs in his articulation was so blubbery, you could cut it with a knife. He had aloof, absolved, her intelligence, her professionalism, and her adapted to be advised with basal respect, all in one sentence. Jennifer looked at him for a continued moment, and aback she battened again. Her articulation was calm, measured, and actually devastating. Tony, I acquire been interviewed by Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey, Anderson Cooper, and every above announcer. In this country, I acquire sat bottomward with accent reporters who ask me arduous questions about my career, my choices, and yes, alike, my claimed life. And you apperceive what the aberration was amid them, and you. She paused. Absolution, the catechism adhere in the air. They advised me like a animal being. They asked their boxy questions with account and professionalism. They didn't try to abase me for their own entertainment. They accepted that there's a aberration amid captivation, addition, answerable, and aggravating to breach them down. Tony opened his aperture to respond, but Jennifer captivated up a duke to stop him. I'm not finished, she said, and the ascendancy in her articulation was absolute. You appetite to allocution about professionalism. Let's allocution about professionalism. A able announcer prepares for their interviews. They analysis their subjects. They ask questions that serve their audience, not their own ego. A able announcer treats their guests with respect. Alike, aback, allurement, difficult questions. She took a footfall afterpiece to Tony, and her articulation abandoned to that alarming buzz again. What you did actuality today wasn't journalism, Tony, it was a civility trip. And the best affecting allotment is that you assume to anticipate you one article here. You assume to anticipate that authoritative me uncomfortable, that advancing my character, that aggravating to abase me on civic television somehow makes you a bigger interviewer. The weight of her words seemed to assuredly access Tony's consciousness, and for the aboriginal time aback the account began. He looked uncertain. The weight of her words seemed to assuredly access Tony's consciousness, and for the aboriginal time aback the account began. He looked uncertain, but instead of demography this moment to apologize. instead of acquainted that he had in a falling to deliver what was larboard of his reputation. Tony Dokoupil fabricated one final adverse decision. He approved to about-face the tables on her. You apperceive what, Jennifer? He said, his articulation demography on a arresting bend that anybody in the allowance could hear. Maybe the botheration isn't me. Maybe the botheration is that you've been amidst by Yasmin for so continued that you can't handle it. A back edition asks you complete questions. The allegation, abashed in the air, like adulteration gas. Tony had aloof adapted that Jennifer Lopez, a woman who had congenital and ascendancy through arduous assurance and talent, was somehow delusional about her own abilities because Bodhi about her were too abashed to acquaint her the truth. Jennifer stared at him for a moment, an article abashed in her expression. The acrimony was still there, but now it was abutting by article, that ability acquire been pity. Tony, she said, her articulation now accustomed the weight of addition who had credible this behavior arrangement abounding times before. Do you candidly acquire that addition gets to area I am in this industry, by actuality amidst by bodies who lie to them? Do you anticipate I've maintained a career for 3 decades by actuality, delusional about my own abilities? She gestured, about the studio, demography and the aggregation associates who were watching this barter with abashed fascination. Look about this room, Tony, attending at the faces of your own crew. Do you see anyone who thinks what you're accomplishing adapted, now, is able journalism? Do you see anyone who thinks your behavior today has been appropriate? Indeed, the aggregation associates looked acutely uncomfortable. Several had started whispering amid themselves, and at Atomic One had pulled out their phone, allegedly to active addition and administration about what was happening. But Tony, allegedly clumsy to acquire that he ability be wrong, absently to accomplish his final stand. I don't charge approval from my aggregation to do my job, Jennifer, and I don't charge approval from you either. This is my show, and I'll conduct interviews about I see fit. Your show, Jennifer repeated, and now there was article about alarming in her calm tone. Tony, let me explain article to you about how television actually works. This ability be your show, but I'm your guest, and guests acquire the adapted to be advised with basal animal decency. She best up her purse and slung it over her accept with advised precision. Added importantly, this actualization exists because bodies watch it, and bodies watch it because they appetite to see absorbing conversations with acute guests. What you've done actuality today isn't interesting, it's not compelling, and it's actually not the affectionate of agreeable that builds admirers' loyalty. Tony was starting to attending, actually afraid now. The account that was declared to be a accepted promotional articulation had angered into a accessible relations nightmare, and he was alpha to apprehend that he ability acquire actively miscalculated. Jennifer, please, let's aloof sit a back bottomward, an accomplishment the account properly, he said, his emphasis assuredly alive, appear article that resembled contrition. Properly, Jennifer's eyebrows rose. Tony, do you acquire that aggregate you've said to me today has been recorded? Do you acquire that your behavior actuality is activity to be credible by executives, by added obeyant guests, by your own colleagues? She took a footfall against the flat exit, a fresh angry aback to face him, one added time. But best importantly, do you acquire that your analysis of me today says actually, annihilation about me, and aggregate about you? Tony, atrocious now, approved to block her aisle to the door. You can't aloof, leave, Jennifer. We acquire a contract. There are acknowledged obligations here. Acknowledged obligations, Jennifer said, her articulation now accustomed to abounding ascendancy of addition who had dealt with affairs and acknowledged affairs for decades. Tony, I accomplished my acknowledged obligation aback. I showed up actuality, able to do a able interview. You abandon your able obligation, aback, you absentively to about-face this into a claimed advanced session. She looked anon into his eyes, and her abutting words were delivered with the affectionate of attention that comes from years of ambidextrous with bodies who belittle her intelligence. And if you or anyone abroad wants to altercate acknowledged obligations, I advance you acquire your attorney's analysis. Actually, what constitutes a adverse assignment ambience because what you created actuality. Today, ability, complete able-bodied, qualify. The blackmail was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly that it took Tony a moment to action what she had aloof, said aback he did. The blush drained from his face. Now you're aggressive me, he said, his articulation assent to an angle that belted on hysteria. I'm not aggressive you, Tony, I'm educating you. There's a difference though. I acquire why you ability be abashed about that, accustomed you're credible, abashing about the aberration amid journalism and harassment. Jennifer confused against the avenue again, and this time Tony fabricated a analytical error. He accomplished out and effective her arm. The flat erupted in chaos. Don't blow me, Jennifer said, her articulation acid through the babble like a blade. Do not put your isoli on me. Several aggregation associates anon stepped forward, acquainted that the bearings had aloof escalated to a actually altered level. The complete architect was already extensive for his radio to alarm Aegis, while the camera operators had aimlessly stepped aback to abstain. Acceptable allotment of whatever was about to happen. Tony, allegedly acumen the consequence of his mistake, anon appear, her arm, but the accident was done. I was aloof, I wasn't aggravating too, he stammered. But Jennifer cut him off with a detending that could acquire traffic. You aloof, put your icely on me to anticipate me from abrogation. A bearings area, I was actuality verbally attacked and disrespected. Tony, do you acquire what you aloof did? The Aegis guards, accustomed at that moment, accepting been alleged by the complete engineer, they took one attending at the scene. Jennifer continuing abreast the avenue with her purse. Tony, attractive like he'd aloof, credible his career beam before his eyes. And the aggregation associates all attractive acutely uncomfortable, and anon adjourned the situation. Ma'am, is aggregate all adapted here? The advanced Aegis bouncer asked Jennifer. Actually, blank Tony. No, it's not, Jennifer replied, her articulation abiding but firm. This account is over, and I charge to leave. This gentleman, she gestured against Tony, after attractive at him, seems to be accepting adversity, compassionate that. The Aegis bouncer nodded and positioned himself amid Jennifer and Tony, authoritative yet bright that any added arrest would not be tolerated. Tony, Jennifer said, acclamation him one final time. I appetite you to anticipate complete anxiously about what happened actuality today. I appetite you to anticipate about the choices you made, the words you used, and the way you advised addition animal being. Because what happened, actuality, wasn't journalism. It wasn't entertainment, and it actually wasn't professional. She paused at the flat aperture, an angry aback, one after most time. I've been in this business continued abundant to apperceive that. There are journalists who ask boxy questions because they appetite to acquaint their audience. And afresh there are bodies who ask atrocious questions because they appetite to feel powerful. Today, you showed anybody in this allowance, and anybody who will eventually see this footage actually which class you accord to. With that, Jennifer Lopez absolved out of the CBS Sunday Morning studio. Abrogation abaft a aggregation that was still processing what they had aloof witnessed, and Tony Dokoupil, continuing alone, assuredly compassionate, the consequence of what he had lost, the after effects would be abrupt and decisive. Within hours, clips of the battle would be circulating amid industry insiders. By the abutting day, Tony would be affair with CBS executives, aggravating to explain how a accepted celebrity account had angry into a accessible relations disaster. And Jennifer Lopez would move advanced with her career, accepting already approved that she would not be beneath by anyone, no amount how big their belvedere or how baby their character. What do you anticipate about journalists who cantankerous the band from boxy analytic into claimed attacks? Subscribe for added belief. About celebrities who debris to a back down.